If you've been around for a while, then you know how much I care about financial freedom for all. One thing that often gets in the way of that is debt. That's why I'm happy to announce that I've partnered with an amazing organization called Juno. Juno helps you get lower interest rates by using the power of group negotiation. It is a completely free resource that you can use to secure lower interest rates on new and existing student loans. Head to the link in the episode show notes to find out more. This is the Dreamers Podcast, episode 60, with licensed marriage and family therapist turned money mindset coach, Jacent Wamala. Today is March 8, 2022.
The most basic thing possible is get help, whether it's researching to see if there are nonprofits nearby or in your area that offer support and information, whether it's going to your HR at your workplace and asking them, am I contributing to retirement right now? Can I get information on that? What does it look like to get the most benefit out of my opportunities and options here in this workplace? Asking for help is the fastest way to success to me, but you want to ask the right people and the right resources for help. Because if you ask somebody who has just as much of a lack and limitation, financial trauma, brain mindset like you, both of you are in the quicksand. You're going to ask somebody in quicksand to help you out of quicksand? That doesn't make sense.
Hello, world. Welcome to the Dreamers Podcast. I am Stephanie Anne-Lyse, also known as Anne-Lyse Wealth. I'm a financial coach and an author. I self-published my first book, Dream of Legacy, a guide to help dreamers reach financial independence and build generational wealth. In this podcast, I'll have conversations with experts and thought leaders who dare to follow their dreams. You'll hear about their journey and their money stories. I hope it inspires you, dreamers out there, to live life on your own terms.
Come on, dreamers, let's change the world!
This podcast is brought to you by Dream of Legacy. Check out dreamoflegacy.com for resources to assist you on your journey to financial independence. Before we get into today's episode, please take a couple minutes to go into Apple Podcasts if you're listening from an Apple device to rate and review the podcast. If you appreciate the free resources that are provided in this podcast, then the best way to let me know is to do just that. Reviews help the podcast be more visible and it helps other dreamers discover the podcast. So thank you. I appreciate you. And now let's get back to today's episode. Hello, welcome to the Dreamers Podcast. I'm your host, Anne-Lyse Wealth, and I'm so happy that you're here today for another episode of the Dreamers Podcast. If you've been listening for a while, I'm so thankful for you. I'm so glad that you keep coming back week after week. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I hope you enjoy this episode and don't forget to follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. Today on the podcast, I'm chatting with Jacent Wamala. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist who's now also a money mindset coach and the founder of Wealth and Wellness University. Jacent specializes in helping women of color write the best chapters of their lives, overcome debt, level up their income streams, and achieve impactful, life-changing financial freedom. Today, we talk about identifying our financial trauma and learning how to deal with them so that we can build long-term wealth. I'm also linking in the show notes Jacent's best advice to overcome financial trauma and build wealth from Business Insider. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and here is Jacent Wamala. Jacent Wamala, welcome to the Dreamers Podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to chat.
Can you tell the listeners a little bit about you and what you do?
Yes, indeed. So I am a first-gen, third culture kid born in Uganda, raised in Las Vegas. And traditionally, I went to school to be a licensed marriage and family therapist. So I have a private practice here in the state of Nevada where I see mostly women of color. And we focus on helping them manage and deal with anxiety, depression, trauma recovery, and financial stress. However, I'm also a money mindset strategist and coach, speaker. And in that work, I help the same population, mostly women of color, be able to create financial freedom faster and to go from living paycheck to paycheck to charging what the worth is of their products and services, maximizing their earning potential so that they're able to pay down significant debt, save thousands of dollars, and invest to their heart's desire. And that was really born out of my own personal journey and what I saw happening in the therapy room. So all of my clients either couldn't pay for therapy or mentioned money as a major stressor for them, whether it was that work stressed them out, but they couldn't leave their job or find another position, that they didn't feel like they were making enough, or that they didn't feel valued or could invest in really going after what they wanted to do in their life. And then personally, I went into beginning at over $70,000 worth of debt. And then I ended up paying off over $90,000 worth of debt between 2017 and 2020 before I turned 30. So it was a combination of those two things that kind of led me to figuring out or asking the question, well, why is it that this specific population is struggling with money when you can easily Google how to do well with you? There's a step-by-step process. There's so many books, but why is it still challenging? And it really, from my perspective, comes down to the mindset and the psychological piece not being addressed enough. So that's my corner of the world, the intersection of mental health and money. And yeah, it's really exciting. It's what's led to where we are today. And I'm excited to just support my community and share what I can.
So in the New York Times, you said that, I guess you serve the specific portion of the population because there is some trauma that people of color and first-gen immigrants deal with when it comes to money. Can you talk more on that?
Definitely. What I have to also say is it's not necessarily specific just to people of color. However, there are specific attributes or specific experiences that people of color have, a specific type of trauma that people of color have when it comes to money. Obviously, the levels and the depths can go very deep. As far back as slavery and oppression, that automatically means trauma with money because people were literally bought and sold by other people for money, with money. So already that creates a certain context and connotation around this thing that we have. But then there's the generational, whatever we would like to say, patterns, for lack of a better word, that are passed down in families. So some families pass down this mindset of accumulate and save, 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 save. And some families pass down a pattern of spend, 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 spend. Whatever comes in goes out. And so for each person, to some extent, it could look different. But what I see a lot of, what most common denominator comes up, is the lack, is the limitation, is not having enough. And that can create a lot of stress when it's chronic. It's one thing for it to be a season in someone's life. It's another thing for it to be ongoing for decades, that they grew up watching multiple generations not having enough, not being prepared for retirement. When someone passes away, we have to get a GoFundMe. All of these things that come together and give us an idea relationship with money, whether it's covert or overt, because sometimes it's not that someone said to you, we lack money, so you should be scared and concerned. It's oftentimes these subtle little experiences and nuances in our daily lives that culminate to create our relationship with money and the trauma it creates. Because to even just break down the word for anyone who doesn't know, the word trauma literally just means a very distressing, difficult experience. So that could be as broad as someone would like it to be, or as specific as someone would like it to be. A lot of people have had very difficult, distressing experiences with money, specifically people of color.
That's very true. So how does one identify their trauma when it comes to their financial trauma?
I think it really comes down to, the quickest thing that comes to my mind is, if you were to look at your bank account, what are some of the initial things that come to mind? Is it tough for you to even look at your bank account? Some people don't even want to check on what's going on with their money because they're money avoidant. And some people are money obsessive. So doing an inventory on what comes up for you mentally and emotionally, sometimes even physically, people have responses when dealing with money. When you think about spending money, what comes up for you? When you think about spending money, are you like, oh no, this is a bad idea. Maybe I shouldn't do this. Maybe I should. Like, if you're questioning yourself and going back and forth, those are indicators of something. Because again, trauma is difficult, distressing life experiences. If it's causing you stress in any way, shape, and form, that's an indicator of something that needs to be investigated and looked at. And then you can always also, if someone wants a formalized assessment, there's people who are certified financial therapists. And you can also, if you want to do your Google life and WebMD yourself, diagnose yourself with, with financial trauma, go ahead. But yeah, you could easily also go online and you would be able to see, if you looked at financial trauma, it'll actually give you some indicators as far as what qualifies.
Are there any tricks that you use with your patients to help them, once they've identified their trauma, actually deal with it so that they can get in the mindset to build wealth as opposed to just continue to be stressed?
Yeah. So I love being able to break things down into the smallest, most bite-sized pieces, just because I feel like so many people feel overwhelmed that's why they back up or they turn the other direction, they run, they hide. So breaking it down to the smallest possible thing is one of the tricks and tips that I use with my clients. So that's why oftentimes on my Instagram page or whatnot, what to me seems like, for lack of a better word, a very simple breakdown is amazing to someone else because they just never thought to do it that way. So if it's like you want to save $1,000 in 30 days, just divide that by the month. You can save $1,000. You can save $500 twice in the month. You can save $250 a week. And then people are like, what? That's amazing. Just break it down, y'all. And you can break it down to the day and realize, oh, it's not that much money. When I think about it, I spend that much at Starbucks. I spend that much at Target. I spend that much at Chick-fil-A. I could send that to my savings or whatever the case may be. So I use a combination of just breaking things down psychologically for them to be more palatable and doable for somebody as opposed to being overwhelmed. And then the other thing that we do is really teach them how to essentially talk to themselves. It sounds weird, but there was a guy, I was listening to a book, I think, and he said, I talk to myself more than I listen to myself. And he had done many Ironmans and all of that fun stuff, some crazy physical feats. And it makes so much sense because if we just listen to the chatter that's going on in our heads, we have, I think, almost like 80, 90,000 thoughts a day. And those thoughts are typically the same negative thoughts from the day before, from the decade before, from childhood. So if we just sit around and continue to listen to the tape that's already playing, guess what? We're going to be recreating the same reality that we've been experiencing. But if we can start getting engaged in that conversation, then we can start reprogramming, replacing, and removing some of the thoughts that don't serve us in this season. So I tell people, if you have a flat tire, is it safe to continue driving with a flat tire on your car? You could do it, but is it safe? Nah. I wouldn't personally take that risk. I got to pull off to the side. And even if you take the flat tire off the car after you assess, can you drive without a tire on your car? Not safely. You're going to start a fire or something. There's going to be some sparks with no tire on your car. So you have to have at least a replacement, if not a new tire. And most people aren't driving around with a brand new tire in their car. So they need a replacement. So if your mind is telling you, if you can become aware, that's why I say what comes up for you. Because if you can't identify what's coming up, then we can't replace it with a new tire. Once we identify what are those things that are coming up, whether it's a lack and scarcity mindset, which is pretty common, whether it's overspending, impulse buying habits, whether it's you have a scarcity and you just want to hoard and spend your money so you never want to invest it because you're scared, you don't know what that really looks like or means, the better we're able to identify what's going on, what the flat tire is in somebody's mind, that gives us the opportunity to come up with a spare, at least, so that then the spare gets them to the vision. Because someone might be like, I want to be debt free. And they might be in $200,000 worth of debt. For them, saying I'm debt free may not feel real, may not feel it's like faking it till you're making it. No, we need to give you the bridge, the spare tire to get you to the debt freedom. I'm open to sticking to a plan for the next month and seeing what happens. I'm committed to trying something different than I've tried before with my money. Those are spare tires as far as mindset goes that help someone to progress. And when they progress, they create momentum. When they create momentum, they build their confidence. As they build their confidence, they can continue to be consistent. And that's what it takes to build wealth in the long term, is consistent execution with a strategic plan.
And so you specifically, you paid off, you said $90,000 of debt in 3 years?
Yeah, crazy.
Did you have to deal with your financial trauma to get to that point?
Yeah, sometimes you don't know what's there until you're forced to look at it. So I really feel like I had the absence of, if that makes sense. It wasn't like money was something that was bad. We just didn't talk about it. I just never saw anyone paying bills. I never saw anyone complain. I never saw anyone talk about wealth. So it was just the lack thereof. There was no conversation. For me, it was more so not having a foundation of financial literacy when life happened. So I was doing all right. I was paying my bills. However, when I ended up getting divorced while I was in grad school, and a divorce automatically forces you to have to deal with financial transition that I was not prepared for. And then my father passed away months after I got divorced. I mentally and emotionally wasn't in a place to be able to handle both the mental strain of the experience and the lack of a financial foundation, a financially literate foundation. So that was a perfect storm for me. So a lot of my debt was connected to the grief and loss of getting divorced and losing my father, and having difficulty coping in those situations, which as any person would. Some of the things that I didn't notice were there was I used to be, maybe probably still to some extent, an emotional eater. Okay. But it's like all emotions. When I'm happy, I want to eat something. When I'm excited, I want to eat. When I'm sad, when I'm mad, when I'm frustrated, when I'm stressed, food is something that I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with. Like I want to engage in because it makes me feel better, especially sugar and fried things and all that fun stuff. So what I noticed was, and I was going through a lot of grief at the time, I was eating out a lot. I wasn't necessarily cooking. But when I started getting serious about my financial journey, I was grocery shopping and meal prepping, and I had food at home. So if I had a stressful day or if I was having a hard day, I'd be driving home and I want to turn into Jack in the Box so I can get me some curly fries and some mini churros. But I'm like, Jacent, what are you doing? You have food at home. This does not go together, these two things. So that's my financial stuff coming up is, oh, I didn't know I was an emotional eater because I always said yes to myself. I never had boundaries with money that forced me to have to look at what these things were going on in my life that I was enabling. I was enabling myself. And so I, like anyone, yes, definitely had to look at myself a little bit further, not for shame or for guilt or blame, but because the awareness and that feedback helped me to move from a victim mentality and a victim perspective and mindset to being empowered to influence my own situation. So if I sit and say, man, the government is these loans and and blah, blah, well, then that means there's nothing I can do about it. But if I say, I'm the one that signed for the loans, I was an adult at the time, I was not coerced. I'm the one that made the choice. And I don't prescribe that anyone needs to pay off all of their loans. That's just what I wanted to do. Because if I want to leave the country and go back to Uganda, if I want to be a nomad, if I want to raise my children and be a stay-at-home mom and not still have to pay on my loans when I'm not working, I wanted to be able to have that freedom. And that's what I thought was going to help me to do that. So that's why I made that my goal, but definitely had to face a lot of financial trauma in the midst of it because I also had to deal with, I had to make more money in order to hit my goal. I made $17,800 in 2016 with a master's degree. So I wasn't even making just barely over poverty level with a master's degree. That's some stuff I needed to work out in my brain because what's going on here that I'm not able to max out and really maximize my earning potential to earn what's going to help me not just to live, but to thrive. So there was a lot of layers to it for sure.
So talk to me about how were you able then to, I wouldn't say that you've maximized your earning potential yet, but...
Not yet, girl.
Talk to us about some of the things that you did to be able to earn more. Because, a lot of times we put a lot of emphasis on spend less, which is very important, but earning more is going to get you closer to building wealth as well. So talk to us about what you did.
Yes, earning more is possible and it's typically pertinent to making it happen when we start looking at the numbers. When I realized, because I calculated my net worth for the first time, like January 2017, 5 years ago, and it was negative. And I was like, what the heck? What are we going to do about this, Jacent? I don't know, Jacent. We need to figure it out. And so I'm having this conversation. Yeah. So your net worth, literally is your assets minus your liabilities. The things that you own, if your car is paid off, you own your car. The things that you own versus what you owe. So if you have a mortgage out on your house, then that potentially falls into an asset that you have negative depending on what you own. If your house is paid off and you don't have any debts or your debts are less than what you own, then you have a positive net worth. If you owe more than you own, you have a negative net worth. So I owned my car. I owned my laptop. Like there's some things in my home that are valuable, but for me, my net worth was negative about $70,000 with my student loans and my credit cards and whatnot. And that's what really was one of the wake up calls for me, because I was like, wait a minute here. Like, if this is where it's at right now, I'm only 26, bruh. What's it going to be if I don't do anything about this? I think it's probably supposed to be positive. I think we would like for it to be positive. So that was clarity for me. I think a lot of people would be scared if they were to confront the reality of their financial situation. And that's why a lot of the times people seek my services out or my support, is because they need support in being able to look at things and not be overwhelmed and run in the opposite direction. But then that was like, okay, if I'm negative, and what would I like? I would like to be in the positive.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Where are we at right now? I'm not really managing my money. I knew managing my money had to happen in order for me to hit my goal. And I knew I wasn't making enough, because like, how much did I make? I got my tax return situation and I was like, I made $17,800. I looked it up, just above poverty level. I was like, that's probably not good. And then I was like, okay, we got to figure something out here. We know that if we want, because I made a deadline. I said, I want to pay off this debt, but I would like to, in a perfect world, pay this off before the time I'm 30. I was 26 going on 27 at the time. So that gave me about 3 years. I divided the amount, 70,000, by 3 years, divided that by 12 months. That gave me a monthly amount that I needed to pay down on my debt in order to hit my goal. Like I said, I break things down and make them real palatable. It's literally what I did in my own journey. Now, I wasn't making enough to pay that stuff down. So
yeah, that was my next question.
Yeah. The numbers were not numbering. The math was not mathing. It did not make sense logically. But there's a difference between eyesight and how you interpret what's in front of you, and mind sight, which is how you imagine and how you interpret what could be possible for you. So what happens is children are really great at mind sight. It's that as we get older, we get so focused on what's right in front of us and what's logical and logistical and makes sense that we forget about mind sight. So it's having a good balance, because I had to know, girl, right now, it does not make sense. But what would make sense is if you were to learn how to earn $2,000 more a month, which sounds crazy, I'm sure, to some people. It sounded crazy to me, but I was like, if I can make $2,000 more a month and I can pay off this stuff, then I can travel around the world and be borderline bougie. I really want that. That's what I want. So then it became managing my money from March 2017. Boy, it was rough. And you have to know, when you're going to start managing your money, it's not just going to be like perfect puzzle pieces coming together. It takes time to build the muscle and the habit and the skill of managing your money. Most people just want to give up after 2 weeks or after 30 days. It's going to take you at least 3 to 6 months just to get the hang of understanding how to budget and manage your money. So I spent from March 2017, probably till about September or so of 2017, learning how to manage my money, starting to track what I was paying on my debt, starting to track what I was spending on a monthly basis, starting to project and decide what I was going to spend on in a month. I started selling things, which helped to create my first emergency fund. And then I was applying for all of the jobs. Literally, I don't know if you guys are going to get the exclusive. No, I literally think I applied at the strip club, not to be a stripper.
To be a bartender?
I live in Las Vegas. I wasn't applying to be a stripper. Okay. I'm going to let the record show. I don't think I've ever told this part to anybody, but it was like for the call center in the back. They have like a call center or whatever. Huh. Girl, I don't know who they're calling or what the conversations consist of. But I had applied. I applied at Walmart. Mind you, I had a master's degree. I was applying everywhere, but I would get on Indeed. I knew how much money I needed to make. I would filter by the salary I needed in order to be able to know what to apply for. I still was working part-time in my own private practice, and I was working part-time teaching at the university here in Las Vegas. So I wanted to keep those, and I wanted to add on top of what I was already doing. My mindset was, I have a master's level degree. What makes me any different than a lawyer, than an engineer, than a doctor? Doctors put themselves through residency. I said, you know what? I'm going through residency. This is my internship. I'm going to squeeze my degree for every penny that it's worth. I said, how many different ways can I make money with this degree? That's what I'm going to do. So I finally did land a job. It took, like I said, from the beginning of 2017, I didn't get a new job and start making more money and significant debt payments until October of 2017. So it wasn't overnight, y'all. Okay. It wasn't something that was just like wave a magic wand. No, I used to live by myself in an apartment, living my whole best life. I moved in with my best friend. She was gracious enough to allow me to move in with her. There was a lot that went into it, but now I get to do whatever I want. So I'm cool with it. Yeah.
And so earlier you mentioned that you were a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm curious to hear, are there any financial traumas that you've noticed that are very common about when it comes to married couples?
Boy. So essentially, many people have their own financial trauma. So imagine you're just trying to figure out your own ish. Now, hurricane your ish with somebody else's ish. And then that's essentially what marriage is. No, not completely, but it has the potential to be one of the really sore spots in a relationship because we don't grow up learning so many things. The basics, such as communication, not even just about money, just communication. People don't take communication until college. It's not a required course or anything until college. We're all out here communicating, but it's different when you're in a relationship, when you're in a romantic relationship, spending your life with somebody. So we don't even have communication skills, for one. We don't even have financial literacy as a foundation in our lives, for two. Then add on top the financial trauma. That's a thing in and all in of itself. So it's really two people a lot of the times coming together, and they have completely different communication styles. They have completely different upbringings and experiences of money growing up that contribute to their money mindset as an adult. And then we have whatever financial trauma that comes into play individually and as a couple, because there's maybe power and control dynamics that come into play. Who makes more money? How are finances managed, maintained, handled as a couple? How to decide how to handle your finances as a couple? Does one person just do it because they're better at it or whatever the case may be? Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a lot of layers there. And sometimes it's like one person is on one extreme and the other person is on the other. How do they find a middle ground? However, for those who are able to put the work in to learn how to address these different areas, it can be amazing. I had a client who I talked to recently, and her partner, she's been focusing on her money, he's been focusing on his, and they've been having conversations with each other. They were able to go on vacation as a couple. They had the money set aside. They were able to spend freely and not be worried or have any issues, any fights, any problems. When we figure that piece out, oh, man, it makes things even better. But when it's a sore spot, when it's a pain point for a couple, it's oftentimes what leads to friction, fights, and going separate ways.
So for any of the dreamers listening, maybe some have taken the time to think about their financial triggers or trauma. What are some of the steps that they can take to start healing their relationship with money?
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is asking, do you believe it's possible to get out of quicksand by yourself? Because if you do, that's going to inform your approach. If you don't, it's going to inform your approach. I haven't yet come across a person who's like, yeah, I could get out of some quicksand by myself. I think it's possible to get out of quicksand by myself. We have to understand that the financial trauma, the lack of financial literacy is like being in quicksand. The scarcity mindset, all of these things are like being in quicksand in your mind, because it's only your mind that holds you back from making progress. So if you believe that getting out of quicksand requires assistance, whatever that assistance, I need a branch, somebody throw me a rope, I need somebody to give me their hand and pull me out, whatever it is that you think is necessary to get out of quicksand is what you need to get out of the financial situation you're currently in. I think that it's really helpful, efficient, and strategic to ask for help. Like the most basic thing possible is get help, whether it's researching to see if there are nonprofits nearby or in your area that offer support and information, whether it's going to your HR at your workplace and asking them, am I contributing to retirement right now? Can I get information on that? What does it look like to get the most benefit out of my opportunities and options here in this workplace? Asking for help is the fastest way to success to me, but you want to ask the right people and the right resources for help. Because if you ask somebody who has just as much of a lack and limitation, financial trauma brain mindset like you, both of you are in the quicksand. You going to ask somebody in quicksand to help you out of quicksand? That doesn't make sense.
Not at all.
We're both going down faster. It doesn't mean we leave people behind either. It just means we are strategic and intentional about where we're getting this information from. You need to be listening to this podcast every single time an episode drops. Do you have the notification bell going off so that when a podcast episode is released, it notifies you on your phone? Because you may not remember. You're busy. You have a lot going on. There's a lot that's on your plate right now. They make it easy by allowing you to subscribe, and they will let you know when, okay, so if you haven't gone back and listen to every episode of this Dreamers podcast, you're playing yourself. You're playing yourself. And if you haven't gone back and listened twice through and taken notes and then actually acted on the things, I am sure that you've had the most amazing people on this podcast. If someone is listening to this podcast and hasn't implemented one step or one piece of information that has been shared on this podcast, you're playing yourself. And I'm just going to be honest and straightforward with you in that. People think that they have to go and get all of this. No, if you're listening, that means you're already to some extent aware, to some extent connected and tapped in. You just may not be executing on what you have access to. You think you need to go get another book. You think you need to go get another whatever, buy another course. You might need to, but you could just start where you are today. Go open up your bank account. How do you feel when you look at it? What do you want to see in your bank account? How would you like to feel when you think about money? Sit with yourself to answer some of these hard questions and begin executing a plan to progress, even if it's something tiny. Deposit $10 into your savings account right now. I dare you. And then DM me and say that you did it so I know it's real. But it's the smallest things. Like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. If you're listening to this podcast episode, what's the one thing that you can take from this podcast episode and execute in the next 24 hours? I dare you. That's what my mind says is we need to couple energy with action. We get really excited when we get on somebody's Instagram live and they're talking like, oh yeah, this is so good. We love when we hear a good podcast. We love when we see Terry's gone from being an assistant principal to making $1 million in a day. We love a good overnight success story that probably took a decade. We love all of the microwavable motivation that we see and have access to. How are we coupling that excitement and that energy with action as soon as we possibly can? Because that's what creates momentum. Momentum creates confidence. Confidence creates consistency. Consistency is what leads to building wealth.
Well said. I like to end the interview with a round of rapid fire questions.
That makes me nervous.
Tell me about a book that changed your perspective on life.
The Smart Money Woman by Aresi Ugwu, I think it is. She's Nigerian. She also has a Netflix series called The Smart Money Woman. Show enough, written by an African woman. It was relatable. It made sense. It was told in a charismatic story. Yeah, amazing.
What's the one thing about money you wish you could tell your younger self?
Start learning sooner.
What's the best investment in yourself you've made so far?
Oh, the best investment I've made in myself so far has been personal and professional development. The masterminds, the coaching, the courses. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thousands and thousands of dollars and well worth it.
Filling the blank in 3 words or less. Money to me is
freedom and options.
That's 3 words. What do you want your legacy to be?
Whew. Oh, that doesn't have to be 3 words, though. Okay, I got a couple words. Yeah, I would just really love my legacy to be one of internal mobilization. So for people to see me and what I've done, and then to be internally mobilized to move in their life from where they are to one step closer to where they want to be. So I want people to say, I've heard of Jacent. Because of her, I did. Because of her, I've executed. Because of her, there was movement. I don't want to inspire people. I don't want people to be motivated. I want people to act. I want people to execute.
Love it. Jacent, well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Please tell the Dreamers where they can find you.
Yes, I also have a podcast. It is called Jacent's Gems. JACENTSGEMS. That's also my name on Instagram. That's where you can find me most active on social media, sharing all the good stuff. If you come to my internet home, don't be rude and disrespectful. Say hi, okay? Send me a DM or something. You don't show up to people's houses and not speak to them. So don't come up on my internet space and not speak to me. And those are the two most active places that I am and do my best to share the most helpful information that I can.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. That was Jacent Wamala. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I cannot wait to see you back here next week for another episode of the Dreamers Podcast. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Dreamers Podcast. You can find the episode show notes and all of the links mentioned at dreamoflegacy.com. If you liked today's episode, here's what you can do to support me and help more dreamers discover the podcast. Follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Rate and review the podcast to help the podcast gain more visibility. Share the podcast with your family, friends, and coworkers. And if you really enjoyed today's episode, please take a second to tag me at thedreamers.podcast on Instagram and let me know what you liked about today's episode. All right, dreamers, that's it for today. I will see you back here next week for another episode of the Dreamers Podcast.
Okay, dreamers, time to build this legacy.
This podcast is for general information purposes only. It is not intended to provide any tax, legal, financial planning, insurance, accounting, investment, or any other kind of professional advice or services. Please consult with an appropriate tax, financial, or legal professional to receive appropriate advice based on your situation.
Sunday, Skincare Day, is one of the ways I keep my sanity in these crazy times. Jumino is an all-natural, Black-owned skincare brand carefully handcrafted by parents who could not find the proper care solutions to address their family skin problems. All Jumino products are made of organic and high-quality ingredients, meticulously chosen to give your skin the smooth results and the glow it deserves.